evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. We're a little short-handed, so Mrs. Kidd will not be joining me up front here. It'll be Mrs. Fickner, our Bayberry principal. Mrs. Kidd is in the sound booth because our tech supervisor is unfortunately ill, and she will be managing the webinar and also possibly answering questions from the sound booth. So don't be startled when you get the Wizard of Oz kind of response from someone who cannot see. So welcome. I want to give a brief overview about the referendum. Just to get started, now our leadership team has been here, give or take a few months, basically since the fall of 2019. Signer started. She's the last one to join us in August of 2020. But since our team has come together, we've been focused on our chief priority of raising student achievement. We also discovered that we had a difficult financial situation. So along with Mr. Pepe and principals, we've been working very hard at trying to improve that financial condition. But we believe at the heart of raising student achievement is really the foundation of it is having an instructional vision that works, an instructional vision that is aligned with 21st century teaching and learning. So as part of this referendum, we have a couple important elements, and I want to begin with the learning spaces. As many of you know, we have a transformed learning commons plan for the media center here at Valley View, which is currently basically a library. But we have plans to transform that into a learning commons where we have flexible spaces for kids to collaborate, because our vision calls for developing critical thinking, creative problem-solving skills for our students. We believe in inquiry and collaboration and helping kids tapping into their natural curiosity and using that to inspire them to work together, to learn, to be creative, to be thoughtful, and to be independent thinkers. In addition to the learning space, we also have plans for the art room, which is basically more of a storage area right now, while the actual storage area is this grand rectangular area that can be transformed into more of an art studio. And what I learned when I went to Borough Council recently from my former board member back in the 2000s when we did the original referendum, there actually were plans to move the art room into this space, but during the process there was a lack of funds. We couldn't complete the job. So it was something that had been planned, and I didn't know that. And it was something that we shared recently, and I'm very appreciative to learn that. So in addition to promoting innovation and design thinking and creative problem solving across the curriculum, we hope to and continue to work towards developing a sense of belonging, inclusive environment for all of us. So this, our vision is for all learners. And also this referendum is for all learners. So in addition to the art studio, we also have new casework and classroom plan at Bayberry. Interested walked in, and I go from the schools here. I can do a little bit of it, but back in the early to mid 70s, I was a student at Bayberry. What I've said repeatedly is that the classroom looked very similar. Casework looks the same, the bathrooms in the classroom were the same. The original spaces. We also have plans for part of the referendum, outdoor learning. It's very important at Valley View, and there is also money set aside to redevelop and repurpose the systems ultimately. On top of that, we also have to be hands on the mechanical operations, learning space, for the students and faculty. And in order to do that, we have to have the resources to keep that in place. So there are elements of the referendum that include enhancing security, ensuring ADA compliance, updating technology infrastructure, and saving energy costs, including health and safety by replacing some outdated HVAC equipment and also building systems. Important part of the referendum, as everyone found, is the opportunity to take advantage of state funding. We submitted our projects to the state for review, and it was determined that 94.5% of the projects were eligible for state funding. What that means is that the state will provide a reduction in costs to taxpayers and debt service. Now, typically, over the last number of years, that's been funded at an 85% rate, and 85% of the 40% gives you roughly 34% contribution from the state. So if you can put that into context here with the existing referendum questions that will be available on December 13th for the vote, we have close to $5 million. Both questions, that's $5 million to state aid would be available. We put together two questions. The first one includes many of those learning spaces and the case work that they vary about the updated learning commons, the interior learning commons in the media center, the arts, the HVAC, site improvements, and just about everything that involves security and technology, all is in that first question. And that first question comes out to $12 million. The second question that can only pass the first question test, and that is the amount of $2.9 million. That includes the outdoor learning commons, it includes the repurposed softball field, and it also includes a couple of new items, which are air conditioning promotions. That's the new items. And those items were placed into this referendum after we got feedback from staff about the need for that. Gyms, particularly in the springs, during the fall. So that gives you a brief overview. I had mentioned the previous referendum, which was in December of 2021. That referendum was in the amount of $14.9 million. Similarly, it had roughly 96% of the projects eligible for state aid. So that again was roughly $5 million. When that referendum failed, and it failed by 51 votes last December, the board established an ad hoc committee. And the ad hoc committee was comprised of roughly 20 members, from board members to administrators to representatives from parent groups like PTO, WAPS, parent, etc., and also community members at large. So last March, after the board commissioned this ad hoc committee, we sent out a mailer to the entire community, welcoming folks to join the committee. We held an information session online at the end of March, and we encouraged people who were interested to send in an application. The board accepted every interested community member, and we then held 7 monthly meetings from May through November. Yes. Okay. Let me do this. I don't want to overdo it. Okay, we have the 7 meetings from May through November. We, at the recommendation of the ad hoc committee, we engaged an independent engineer who issued a report after looking at the HVAC equipment and rendered a recommendation that the HVAC be replaced. We took members of the committee on building tours so that they could see the HVAC equipment in classrooms. And ultimately, the ad hoc referendum committee made recommendations to the operations committee of the board, and the operations committee made recommendations to the full board, and the board moved forward, decided to move forward with the 2 questions. Before I forget, one of the items that was removed from the original referendum was storage building at Valley View. There was also, I believe, a bathroom that was proposed over at Bayberry that was removed from that original referendum. So it's not an identical referendum, but the ad hoc committee was made recommendations to keep projects in. We went through all the projects with them, and they issued these recommendations. Now we have on our website, a new website, which we're very proud of, all this information. So all the numbers, specific details. We sent the mailer out right before Thanksgiving, so everyone should have received that. That went out to the entire community. And we're holding this question and answer session tonight and making it a virtual option. Before we move forward with questions from the folks on the webinar, I'd like to give everyone here an opportunity to ask questions. Is that on this? You are?
Okay. So you mentioned the 94% of the projects were funded by the state. To that end, do we actually have final funding from the state at this point on the percentage of the work?
Yes, the 94.5% of the projects were deemed eligible for the state funding at that rate. That's probably going to be 34% of the project's costs, the greater the ultimate cost of the taxpayers. The way the process works is after you submit the architects submit the plans, and the state can review all of these projects. They issue something called a preliminary eligibility assessment, and they send that. It's called a PEC letter. Once you get that letter, as long as you don't indicate an interest in appealing or want to change it in any way, they, as a matter of course, automatically send out the final letter, the ethics. And so the PEC letters were dated November 2nd. So by my calculations, the state should be issuing these FEC letters tomorrow or at the latest on Monday. Should be receiving those. But it's a common practice that those letters just change from preliminary to final. Yeah, and I confirmed that with the bond council several times. The money that is left over from the amount borrowed goes back to the taxpayers.
Mr. Alexis, can you just make sure that the microphone is on when the audience is speaking?
Good evening, Hans.
Can you check the microphone? I don't think that the power is on. Let me know if you need batteries, Dory.
Hans, if you want to ask the question, I can repeat it so that the folks at home can hear it.
Okay.
Well, it's the debt servicing, and you're right. This is question is, where does the $5 million in state aid on the flyer fit in the debt service? And you're right, Hans, in terms of Rich Pepe is probably the better person answering that question, but he unfortunately can't be here, so I'm going to do my best to answer that question. And the $5 million, the $5 million is, that's the amount that will be contributed by the state for the debt service aid.
If that's not the debt service I'm talking about. You're saying that we're going to be getting $15 million from a bond sale. Okay, and that's the question. The force is 15 million, and we're showing the force at 15 million. I don't know anybody who can give us free money for 2 years. So there's an interest cost on that 15 million. And I think it's 3.5%. I don't, you know what the bond, how that
I think there was an estimate on the document created by Phoenix advisors, and it lists the estimated interest rate at 4.25%.
I did a calculation, 3.5.
Okay.
And the total, and you know, you can use principal now, you don't have to go to principal. But if you look at an average, and an average over the 20 years on a $15.7 million issue at 3.5%, we're talking $5.77 million. So, you know, that's got to be figured in this question. But the cost to pay back the 15.7 million is about 20 million.
Okay. And but yes, we're relying. So that's a little confusing, but here we did engage the financial advisors. So we have this firm called Phoenix Advisors that does this for a living. This is how they worked it out based on the total cost of the projects. And so what it comes down to, though, is like, what's the taxpayer contribution? And what they've calculated is that the taxpayer contribution over the course of the life of the bonds is $260 per year for question 1, and then an additional $63 if question 2 passes. So for a total of $323, and that's for the average assessed home and watch home, which is currently at $761,000. It's a little confusing. But what I will do, Hans, is I will take that question back, not necessarily to Rich Patrick, but to the Phoenix advisors, and we get, you know, their opinion on that, and how this should be. Thank you for your comment. You lost the mic. Sure. Go ahead, Lisa. Yeah, we're working with the microphone. We're taking the question. Okay. If all the funding is not utilized, we would have to go to a bidding process. That's absolutely correct. Yes. Comes to mind. Oh, hi.
whatever was important.
But it's a good question, and the firm that we work with, Phoenix Advisors, who does a lot of work with school districts and a lot of work with referenda, they revised this, as recently as I believe it was late October, where they gave us a trick, so it's a different rate last year. So they're confident based on their experience, of course, that they do that this rate will work. That's the estimate, yes, purposes of counting.
And the other question about the estimate, right? Like I understand there was a contracting firm that provided an estimate, the breakdown for each item. I was wondering, again, those costs were probably provided at some point in the past, with the inflation, right? Cost of the increase considerably, and I was wondering, how much we can cover with the million that we could afford, given the current.
No, good question. And the firm is an architectural firm that specializes in this work, schools, in DRG architects, and they put together estimates so that we can assemble the projects and submit them to the state. And then we go out to the bidding process. So this is their estimate on what this work will cost. And maybe the bid comes back lower, maybe, it comes back a little bit higher, or maybe we can't do all the work, but, chances are, and based on everything they've said to us, and we've worked very closely with them for about 2 years on this, they feel that these numbers, are conservative and that they will work. Are experiencing right now. That's a good question.
And the last question. So around the contracting, the companies that will, assign, right? I don't know if you're through a big process. Is there any consideration given to the independence of these contracting firms? I think it's important to make sure that these companies do not have any conflict. They have not have any independent issues. Like they have not contributed to any campaign that we've been through election process and a lot of donations have been done. We want to make sure that these companies that will win the bid, they don't, they are not in any way they're independent with the parties, right? Whether it be, the board, it be the, the school, it be the counseling town, other parties.
Well, there's a process in my career. No one knows who's bidding or who's bidding what amount.
My microphone
We
just like
require people to vote.
is it on Zoom?
That's the process.
There's an input.
Yeah.
So
As far as conflict,
in Zoom
there
video
really
settings.
should be any conflict. Because
There should be any profit regardless of, like, even if they have higher bid.
It's all the way up.
In my personal.
This
opinion,
might
I
be
think,
They don't look good.
have
It is on settings in Zoom. Yeah, I'll check.
also in town, any kind of decision.
that's how it would be. So. Thank you. I don't know if I can capture all of the length of the questions.
Yeah.
But,
Hello? I'm not. Thank you. All right, so we talked a lot about the cost. Was there an analysis done on what the benefit would be to taxpayers in terms of, land assessment or home assessment or whatever, you know, when we go in through our kitchen, we know that we get some, you know, some benefits on the back end with the home value. So is there any benefits to talk about with regards to upgrades and replacements to our school?
Good question, Patty. And you came through loud and clear. So yes, there are tremendous benefits to maintaining, upgrading, transforming learning spaces in our district and making sure it's a safe, comfortable environment for our students and staff. We don't have a formal analysis that gives you some sort of calculation on that, but I can tell you that typically when you invest in the school, property values go up. I don't have the direct proportion that I could quote, but it's common knowledge that this has tremendous benefits for the community. And a referendum like this is an opportunity to invest in schools and increase property values at the same time. That's a very good point.
Hi there. The last time Washington passed the referendum, both of the schools were expanded. This referendum notably doesn't expand the footprint of either school. Can you just speak to why that was not included in this referendum and address just a bit about class size in our buildings?
Sure. A couple of things on that. When the original assessment was done, this assessment goes back several years in terms of looking at what the needs are in the long range plan, and that ended up turning into this list of projects and the analysis and the submission to the state. We currently do not have a population that would exceed the available space. To give you an example, right now we have 662 students. At any point in the last 3 years since I've been here, I've seen that fluctuate, and understandably so with the pandemic, when the number dropped to probably around 600 at one point, but when I first got here, it was 620. It's climbed back steadily. Not necessarily from new development, which everyone is concerned about, the way the Bonnie Burn development. It's not started yet, but I think we ended the year with about 636 students. At one point, when I went back to some records, I think it was around 2011 or 2013, we had over 750 students in the district. And we were able to accommodate that. We currently have classroom space at Bayberry that we can use, that's being used for small group instruction, basic skills, a variety of other purposes, but ones that could be converted into classroom space we need to expand the number of sections in each grade level. So for example, there's been a lot of talk this fall about class sizes. What happened, and I think we explained this at board meeting, but it's worth repeating. When we were planning for this current school year in budgeting, and we had varying class sizes and grade level class sizes, we were planning for a large third grade class. And as luck would have it, we had a number of students leave the district in third grade after we decided to make 4 sections in the third grade. And leave the fourth grade with 3 sections, meaning 3 teachers teaching all the students in fourth grade. We had an influx of fourth graders in August for the summer, and that number rose to 78, I believe. And I think we had 26 to 27 in some classes in the fourth grade. But that's an anomaly. I mean, that's in fourth grade with 2 classes of 27 and 1 of 26. That accurate? Yeah. And so that is something that I'm also it bears repeating too. The demographers report that was done back in the early 2019, I think, predicted just I think 72 students, K-12 coming in from the new development. We can accommodate more students here. So that this to build classrooms for the sake of building classrooms, that would, we didn't get numbers on that, what it would cost, but I imagine that would significantly add to the cost of the referendum. So in order to reduce class sizes, like in the example I just gave, we need to have additional teachers. And that's not something that gets addressed in the referendum. What the referendum can do is address operating needs, maintenance, replacement needs, things that we would have to draw on the regular budget from. And quite frankly, right now, this regular budget doesn't, it's not sufficient. We have a tax levy cap of 2%, like all school districts and municipalities. And we have a contract with the teachers that is above 2% every year, and the contract with the salaries of the teachers and the health benefits. And health benefits so far in excess of 3%. And then we also have transportation costs this year that have skyrocketed, literally. And so all those competing interests make it very difficult to set aside other money for maintenance repairs. It makes it difficult, very difficult to hire more teachers. So what we've done over the last few years is find ways to eliminate some positions, combine some positions, and that has helped us get to the point where we are now that we can pass a budget that's balanced. But we've kind of run out of positions to consolidate, eliminate. So we're in a tough spot. Other questions?
Can you talk a little bit about implementation timeline, please?
Okay, in terms of the referendum, the way it's been explained by the architects is that the work would get done over the course of the next, they say that, for argument's sake, the referendum passes in December. We go out for the bids and get a contractor. Some of the work would be done this coming summer. Other parts of the work would be done during school vacations throughout the year. The next summer would be another full summer of work, probably a very busy one. And then probably finishing up by the end of the calendar year, school recess in December. So that brings us to the 2024, the end of 2024.
That will be implemented by then. There's a bunch of things going on. There's something there.
Well, we don't have a set schedule. What the architects have told us is that there's a lot of engineering work and design specifications that have to be created for certain elements dealing with the HVAC and some other parts of the projects. And they probably would not have all that done for that first summer and get the, go through the bidding process and get the work started. So that would probably, be on for the second summer of 2024. Other things can take place in the summer right away in terms of case work in the classrooms. Ideally, I would love to have the meeting with the Learning Commons at the Valley View Media Center in place for September of 2024, but that remains to be seen in terms of what can get accomplished.
Hi, sorry, I drove in, it's hard to hear on the Zoom. I'm not sure if this was asked already. If the referendum doesn't pass, what is the plan to address HVAC and other issues?
Well, that's a good question. It's also a challenging one because we have a very small capital reserve, much smaller than neighboring districts and schools in the area. We already have earmarked half of that capital reserve for this current year in the event that one of the chillers goes and we have to replace that in the spring. So we have about 1.2 million in capital reserve. Technically, we've earmarked 600,000 of that right now. And so If that doesn't get used, it will go back into capital reserve, but the goal is to continue to build the reserves, and it's just been very difficult to do, given our current situation with the annual budget, but that is part of the plan. I can't speak to the plan in terms of what exactly would take place, whether another referendum would be repackaged, but that takes time. I mean, it's a whole year, and we really got this done fast, given that the first referendum was rejected in December 2021. To get all of this repackaged and sent to the state and have the state approve it, normally takes a much longer time. So we're fortunate that we have this available for December 13th this year.
Follow-up question. So it's been mentioned that there are opportunities for other types of grants. Can you speak about this, or are those not really?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It depends, right? So we have taken advantage of some of these clean energy programs that the state offers through entities like PSNG. We just had new boilers put in, and they're basically energy savings programs. So not all of the projects, qualify. Certain projects will qualify, and we try to maximize as many projects that we qualify for the programs that we took advantage of in 2020 and most recently this summer. But there's no guarantee that those will continue or that our projects will be eligible for those programs. So it's not something we can necessarily rely on to take care of all the work that needs to be taken care of based on the recommendations of the experts that we can teach.
Thank you for hosting this session tonight. I know a lot of people are very interested in this town, and this is very important issues. Obviously, there's lots of people out here, and I applaud you for all the hard work trying to get information out there. HVAC is obviously a huge ticket item, and there's a lot of information that's going around, and some I find to be truthful and some not. I'd like to understand better, and I don't know if you can speak to it or someone else. Are there immediate repairs that can be done to fix the situation? I mean, we've been studying it for 2 years. I would like to think with all of the sort of people we have who work here, if it could have been done so easily, it would have been done in the past 2 years.
Yeah, and that goes back to the problem with our finances, that we just don't have the kind of money that we would need to repair these major items. And when we do it through a referendum, I think it's important for everyone to remember, and it's easy to kind of track of this, that we can get the debt service aid, which is basically a 1/3 contribution from the state. And since we went out for the first referendum last December, there have been 5 other dates that have been available for the 5 dates per year that school districts can go out for elections on a school referendum. And there have been probably about 40 referenda throughout the state, and the large majority, 95% of them have passed. Those are all, districts taking advantage of the debt service and taking care of projects out of it.
So I heard you say earlier that there was an independent consultant who came in and studied the HVAC to confirm whether or not it was repaired, needed to replace. I thought I had understood that there was a second team. Am I mistaken? Or
Yeah,
what
I
I
need to clarify that. That's a good question.
actually need this HVAC?
Yeah. Well, we had our architects who have their engineering firm that it's the original assessment, made the recommendation to replace it. I mean, these HVAC units were put in after the first referendum, so now they're 21 years old, and the typical lifespan is 20 years old. So there was some concern from members of the ad hoc committee that we didn't have to replace these. This could be rehab, and we brought that back to our engineers. They disagree with that, and then it was recommended by the committee to engage an independent engineer firm to do an analysis. And they did that, and said the best way for us to move forward to create the kind of environment that we need to create is to replace the HVAC system.
Okay.
The remaining HVAC system that hasn't been replaced. But that includes all the classroom units.
Absolutely. So I have 4 kids, one now in high school, 3 still in the district. I'm hearing about the HVAC from their perspective. And I routinely hear of how obviously the classrooms are, they're at the bottom, they're cold. And it's really horrifying as a parent for your, 6-7-year-old kid home saying, "Mommy, I was freezing today." I don't know, are they being dramatic? What is it like in the classrooms? I mean, is it really as bad as children?
That might be a better question for the principals. And I have Denise standing up here, and I'll give the microphone, so I'm going to turn it over.
Yeah, I mean, it does fluctuate, and I think that's what they're experiencing. So like our office would be like hotter, a little warmer, and then when you go out in the hall, it's a little chillier. So it does fluctuate. I have noticed that depending on the rooms and where you're at. Larger spaces, obviously, like the APR, can be a little chillier, but then when you pass 2 grades in there, it gets pretty warm pretty quick. So that's what I've experienced.
In the classrooms themselves, last year, now again this year, it's probably like, class.
I have not, like, so just recently.
No, not recently, like last year, I know my 4th grader was wearing her coat, and at the time, my 1st grader was saying as well, that they were very, very cold in class, and now my current 5th grader is saying again, her class is very cold, but make sure, spare jacket in class.
I can check in with our facilities guy about that. I have not seen anyone wearing coats this year. But I can check in with him. I do think it's a little tricky just to get it right, because you might have like my office ladies will call and say, "It's cold in here," and I'll say, "No, it's hot." So it depends on who is requesting it to be a little warmer, a little colder, and it's a little hard to regulate. But I can talk to Mr. Boyd about that. See if he can fix it.
So I know you answered this question earlier, but how soon will we be feeling if the referendum does pass? How soon will we be feeling the benefit of the HVAC system? I mean, is it literally?
It depends. I don't know 100% what the schedule would be for the unit ventilators in the classroom, whether that can be done for that first summer, or whether we have to wait next summer because the design specs that we put together. So, but chances are it could be the second summer.
Okay, thank you.
And I did visit the other day on Monday for the faculty meeting. All the when we were in the media center, all the teachers came in there complaining how cold it was. Yeah. I don't say that. Does this kid have anything to add, or?
When we went on the walkthrough, we specifically heard the noises in the classroom from the units in there. And we also were discussing the ventilation system. Can you please just go over that and then also explain what changes would happen if the referendum passes for those 2 items?
Well, I mean, I think that's typical. I've been working in schools for a long time. That with the aging unit ventilators, they do become very noisy. But I think one thing that the engineers and architects pointed out in our situation at Bayberry is that there would have to be a redesign too of where the exhaust fan is, and based on where the air is coming from, as well as where thermostats are placed. So it's not the ideal situation, but as the equipment ages, you see increased number of problems, and again fluctuations in temperature and other kinds of problems. And I don't know that we're going to get a fair warning when something is going to just break or give out.
We also discussed the difference between repairing and replacing the HVAC. Can you please explain the benefits of replacing the HVAC or the ventilation system as opposed to what we have now and just repairing?
Well, yeah, of course, we have a brand new unit. And also one of the other things I continue to hear from the architects too is that when you have an old building system and old equipment, and then you start putting new equipment in with an aging building system controls, that causes problems. And so we do have some new HVAC rooftop units in the classroom, but in HVAC units, and the controls don't necessarily communicate the way they should. We had our engineer look at it, we had the independent engineer look at it, and they specifically said that replacing was the best way to go. We gave them a whole bunch of different questions, suggestions that have been offered to us, they still came back with that recommendation. So having a whole new system in place, it's going to make for a much more conducive environment for learning and for safety and comfort of our students and staff.
I did want to quickly just address the question about the temperature in the rooms in Valley View. I know Denise spoke about Bayberry. We actually had to remove children from a classroom on 3 separate days one week because it was over 95 degrees in a classroom, even with the windows open and it being cold outside. So it is an issue. We have classrooms that are too cold. That's easy. The kids can wear their coats. But when we can't control the amount of heat in the classroom, obviously learning can't take place in there. So, it is a real issue. The noises that Mrs. Harvey brought up are a real issue. It gets difficult for a teacher to talk over that all the time. And if you're the student sitting by that noise in the classroom, it's very difficult to be able to pay attention, to work with groups, to have a conversation. So they are real issues that are impacting the children in Valley View. Thank you.
Thanks.
I wasn't sure if board members were going to be speaking at this event. Since Dory made a couple comments, I would just say that we did have an operations committee meeting just yesterday at 4:30, and Mr. Boyd provided us an update that all classrooms in Bayberry and Valley View, all of the other rooms, gymnasiums, media centers are operating at the set temperature, that there is not a cold classroom in either school, that there is the ability to control the temperature of every classroom, both schools, and that he can do that both from his desktop and from his phone in the school and at home. So I was very concerned also about some of these reports I had been hearing. I was able to get it on our operations committee agenda for yesterday. And now that the cold weather is upon us, I was very happy to hear that he can see with the color coding, blue for colder, and if there's other problems, other color codes, and it's controlled to the degree. He's able to control it to the degree. So I was very happy to hear that, and I just wanted to share that since that's been a concern of mine and other press.
Thanks, Anthony. But just to clarify too, I mean, Mr. Boyd didn't, that sounds like everything's operating perfect. He explained that that's the first thing he has to address every morning and check these temperatures in the rooms, and then he does get complaints from teachers that something is too high or too low, and then he has to kind of overcompensate for some. Again, building controls are not ideal because it's an older system. And so there are ongoing issues, but it's one area.
Yeah, so I was luckily at that same meeting, and that's true what Mr. Ambrosio said, but also what Mr. Boyd said was that irrespective of the system control, they couldn't be trusted and had to have someone actually go to the room with a temperature gun, validate, because sometimes they have mislead. So I'm sure not every room is cold or hot, but on the flip side, if you can't trust the temperature controls because the units are past its useful life, then you shouldn't be sending people to rooms to temperature control. So it's one or the other. It works or it doesn't work. So like that, that's the comment.
Thank you.
Well, and I'm answering the question that was asked about the current conditions, and I'll just add that Mr. Boyd said that he was using that temperature gun as a check so that he could check to make sure that it was accurate, because he wanted to take every possible opportunity he could to double check, and he found that in most cases it was reading accurately, and he had no trouble controlling it if someone wanted it bumped up or down a degree or two in any direction.
Is it working now?
It is.
I don't want to make this a HVAC, but I am a licensed professional engineer. I put these units in, I've worked in hospitals, parking libraries. And unit ventilators are not a very sophisticated item. We can replace a unit ventilator any room at any time, probably over a long weekend. Argue with that, yes or no? So we could have been replacing bad unit ventilators. And I'm sure there are some that could have started that 3 years ago. At $20 or $20,000 a pop, the unit ventilator, and no one $10,000. I think the board has to look at itself and say, why haven't we spent? We take $1.3 million. And all of them have to get that. But we could have started with this. And to me, there is no excuse why a unit ventilator not operating properly. If it's very place, $20,000 a pop, I need an engineer. Contract out, contract. So I think, we need to keep in mind what the total unit ventilators in all of the schools will probably be replaced for about less than $1 million. They're $6 million range. We got a question, here's another plan. The chiller could go, but the chiller could go 30 years. You just take a look at how long our chiller could go. So I think we really have to put HVAC. Units can be fixed very easily. They have parts are available. Check vendors who can do it. So I think we can't blame the need for referendum that was antiquated. Don't, it's 20 years old, it's antiquated. What you're going to buy today, very similar to unit. Yeah, parents haven't worn in that time. Physically, I was super technical. And I was really glad to hear that I learned that it looks like a control system. Because that is the key. And the sensor isn't working right, you have an automatic control company. Change that sensor. Actually, if you wanted to, you could probably have your phone midnight, check every temperature. That's wonderful. Thank you, Hans. Yeah. But I think if that estimate's accurate, then a lot of money will be going back to taxpayers. Well, my point is, it shouldn't be going out of, we should be going out of the point, but I also remember too, sharing all this with the committee, sharing it with the engineers and the architects, and getting a different answer from them. So I mean, well, take my answer back to them and see if they can replace it. I think that was already communicated. Do you really want to?
So
No, I think honestly, all this was brought up and it was shared with the architects and the engineers. I disagree with them. I've had business administrators who have been through plenty of these referendum reports. I'm not talking about Richmond, I'm talking about business administrators I know, and they've all recommended to us too that the way to do this is to replace the equipment. So I can only base this on what recommendations I get from the experts. So that's awesome.
So to follow up on what Hans is insinuating, I'm just going to ask a question. In your opinion, is this referendum, I keep hearing the words bloated and inflated. So I'd like you to speak to that because you had multiple experts come in to render their.
I would not characterize it as bloated or inflated. I understand there's a process for the architects to go through this and identify the needs in consultation with the school administration, and put together a list of projects that they believe are necessary and important and needed, to be replaced in terms of HVAC equipment. And then they put together some standard in the industry that's required because someone brought it up before about inflation and prices changing. They put in certain escalation costs and also soft costs that become part of the number. So that 6.5 million doesn't necessarily just for the actual equipment.
there's those percentages that are, coefficients, the amount, the numbers become higher. But again, we have to, they do this based on their experience, and then we get bidders to come in. We have to take the lowest bidder, as I said, and we move forward that way. But if they're too low, we risk not having the opportunity to do the work. And then again, all the money that is not spent will go back to the tax.
Hi, I'm interested in hearing what are the top 3 things outside of HVAC urgent? Like bathroom, I've heard a bit about things that some people wondered it, but I'm very curious.
Well, yeah, I don't know that we rank the priorities, in terms of what's been recommended and has been put forward and submitted to the state. The bathrooms are on there because, as I mentioned at the beginning, those bathrooms I use as elementary school students. They are small, cramped areas. They are not ADA compliant. And the recommendation was to make these bathrooms, redesign them, bring them into the 21st century, and make them ADA compliant. Our students and staff can do that also with some of the multi-toilet units, like in the media center at Bayberry, some of the other bathrooms to make them compliant and bring them into the 21st century. So I do think that I do think for the focus on the classrooms, it's a school superintendent. I believe in the importance of making these classrooms more functional too and more aesthetic. Or for all the casework that would be involved, this changes the whole dynamic and appearance of the room for the kids. There are certain areas that are going to get flooring replaced. It's just, to see classrooms that like they're still in the 1970s and 80s. It's not great for a community like this. And I think kids deserve better, and I think the staff does too. So that's important. I think security is important. Start talking about what's urgent, what's best practice here in 2022. We need to enhance security. We need to future-proof the technology infrastructure. I don't want to go through that situation we had in fall of 2020 when we came back for hybrid learning, and all of a sudden we find out that the technology is not supporting our program, and we just keep getting bumped off, and teachers are frustrated. Thankfully, we were able to get that remediated quickly, and that was unbelievable how fast we were able to do that. Resources that were provided to us, but I don't want to go through this.
Mr. Alexis, we have 2 minutes.
Okay. Do we have questions on the Zoom meeting?
If there is anyone on the Zoom meeting who would like to ask a question, please raise your hand at this time. Francesca, you are permitted to talk.
Hi, good evening. I just have a question about the security upgrades. Would they be completed if the referendum is not passed? Thank you.
I'd like to say they would be. I don't know where exactly we would get the money for that. It is a priority. And it's an expensive endeavor and it's an important one, but we would have to look long and hard at trying to find the money to do that work.
Is there anyone else who's interested in asking a question that is on the Zoom? There are none at this time.
Thanks.
Frank. Hi. Education. That's what we're doing. These facilities, is that correct?
That's correct.
And maybe to the principal himself, I'm happy to take an offline discussion too, the Hans, because what year did you retire from engineering, Hans? Oh yeah, it does, but we can do that away from here. But anyway, thank you. And anytime you want to have it too, Anthony. What role does the physical nature of the plant, the conditions of the plant,
play in the management, the principal's views, and yourselves. Spent a lot of time today researching that myself, but I'd like to hear from you all, you know, how that improves or doesn't improve the work of the teachers and the students in this great town of Washington.
Well, I'll begin and then I'll let Mrs. Kidd talk. You know, the school facility and the environment, the learning environment, paramount to raising. We want interruption free. We want comfortable settings. We want areas and learning spaces that are going to inspire kids and teachers. When we have mechanical operations or other distractions, like Mrs. Kidd said, when students have to be moved out of a classroom or, you know, whatever it might be, whether it's, you know, the principal dealing with buildings and ground supervisor to get something fixed on a temporary basis, this all takes away from, you know, the time and attention they have for focusing on learning and advanced learning. That's their core priority in terms of educational leaders and instructional leaders in schools. So yeah, you know, it's the core foundation of, you know, how we move forward with teaching and learning in school.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say the same thing, and it's not just our opinion that these things promote student achievement. There's research to support it. We're not just saying, you know, the comfort of our students is important. It does impact achievement. And some of these things do impact their motivation to come to school, their engagement with the school. Those things are huge, and especially at the middle school, if they have areas that they think are cool and they are excited to go to, it's so important. It's easier to get little ones excited to go to school, but I know it all matters. Okay.
Yes, I'll wrap it up because it's 8:02. But I think learning environments and the environment that a child spends most of their day in, or the environment any of us spend most of our day in, has to be carefully planned. The workforce that they're going into, the different job opportunities that they're going into, our job is to prepare them to be able to work and collaborate in these different types of spaces for jobs that haven't been created yet, that are new and upcoming. And if we're sitting in rows and we can't hear the teacher and the instruction is poor and the facilities are poor, we are really doing a disservice for our children and for our staff, because nobody wants to spend the day uncomfortable and not seen and not heard and not prepared for whatever they want to do in the future. So that's my 2 cents. But Mr. Alexis, it is 8:03, just so you know.
Thank you.
Right, unless there's another question, I want to thank everyone for coming. Oh, one final question. Yeah, go ahead.
Elementary school, the classroom size is very big. It's, now today, as of today, 28 kids in my classroom. Because 27, but my son just told me there's a new student coming in today. Oh, that's 27. Okay. Okay. So yeah, I'm glad you kind of touched that, but I wanted to assure, like, to get some confirmation that, you know, passing this referendum will be able to address, like from what I understand, but I wanted to, you know, confirmation that will free up some budget so that classroom size can be addressed.
But what we plan on doing in the next year's budget is looking for ways to hire another teacher at least, right? So that we can reduce class sizes in your son's in 4th grade, right? That's the one grade level that has large class sizes in favor. The others are relatively small. And so, yes, the referendum will help us address capital needs and you know, use funds for updating the school that we wouldn't have to take from an operating budget, because the operating budget doesn't have enough money for us to do the kinds of things that we it's definitely a priority for us in making sure that we can, keep the class sizes, modest. All right, thank you all very much for coming. And again, if you have questions, stick around for a little bit. If anyone else wants to have a conversation, and also you always have the referendum email address, referendum@washingtonschools.us, and you can send questions in there. All right, thanks, everyone.